Dr. Maeve Lockhart pressed her palms flat against the rough wooden desk in her cramped office, the afternoon light streaming through dusty windows casting shadows across unpaid bills scattered before her, and tried to remember when exactly everything had started to fall apart. The year was 1884, and Llano, Texas had seemed like the perfect place to establish herself as one of the first female physicians in the territory. But 3 years later, she found herself staring at a notice from the medical supply company threatening legal action if she did not remit $60 within 7 days. Her hands trembled slightly as she calculated again, though she knew the numbers by heart. $42 in her bank account, $18 short, and that was before considering rent, food, or the loan she owed to the pharmacy for the morphine she had purchased last month to ease old Mrs. Henderson's passing. The door to her office swung open without a knock, and Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped inside, his weathered face creased with concern. "Doc Lockhart, we got a situation down at the Hanson Ranch. One of the hands got kicked by a horse. Legs broke bad." Maeve grabbed her medical bag without hesitation, checking quickly that she had sufficient bandages and her precious remaining vial of carbolic acid for disinfection. "Have someone bring the wagon around. We need to get him stabilized before we can move him back here." The sheriff nodded, already turning to leave, then paused. "Doc, I know things have been tight. The town council's been talking about maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement with your fees." "I appreciate that, Tom, but charity won't help me right now." Maeve followed him out into the blazing Texas heat, where the main street of Llano stretched before them, all sun-bleached wood and red dust. "What I need are patients who can actually pay." The ride out to the Hanson Ranch took 40 minutes, and by the time they arrived, Maeve found the injured cowhand lying in the shade of the barn, his face pale with shock and his right leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. She knelt beside him immediately, her professional demeanor sliding into place as she assessed the break. Compound fracture, but thankfully the bone had not pierced the skin completely. She would need to set it carefully. "What's your name?" she asked the young man, whose teeth were gritted against the pain. "Charlie, madam, Charlie Oakes." "Well, Charlie, I'm going to give you something for the pain, and then I'm going to set this leg. It's going to hurt like hell either way, but the laudanum will take the edge off." She worked efficiently, aware of the circle of ranch hands watching her with a mixture of respect and skepticism. Female doctors were still a novelty, and every procedure felt like a test she had to pass. By the time she had the leg splinted and wrapped, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Mr. Hanson himself approached as she was washing her hands in a basin one of the hands had brought out. "What do I owe you, Doc?" $5 for the setting and splint. Another $1 if you want me to check on him in a few days to make sure infection doesn't set in." Hanson pulled out his wallet without complaint, counting out $6 silver. "Appreciate you coming out so quick. Charlie's a good worker. Hate to lose him over a broken leg." The money felt substantial in Maeve's pocket as she climbed back into the wagon, but she knew it barely made a dent in what she owed. $54 still to go, and 6 days to find it. That evening, she sat in her small room above the office, a space barely large enough for a bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing all her worldly possessions. She had soup heating on the small stove in the corner, and she ate mechanically while reviewing her accounts again. There had to be something she was missing, some solution that would present itself if she just looked hard enough. A knock at the door startled her from her calculations. When she opened it, she found Martha Simmons, the banker's wife, standing in the hallway with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the lingering heat. "Mrs. Simmons, are you all right? Is it your husband's gout again?" "No, no, nothing like that." Martha's eyes darted nervously down the hallway. "I came to talk to you about a personal matter. May I come in?" Maeve stepped aside and Martha entered, perching on the edge of the bed while Maeve took the room's single chair. The older woman twisted her hands in her lap, clearly struggling with whatever had brought her here. "I believe I might be with child," Martha finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My monthly courses have stopped, and I've been feeling poorly in the mornings." Maeve felt a mix of emotions. Martha was 43 years old and already had 5 grown children. A pregnancy at her age carried significant risks. "How long has it been since your last courses?" 2 months now." "I'll need to examine you to be certain, but the symptoms you are describing are consistent with pregnancy." "How does your husband feel about this?" Martha's face crumpled slightly. "He doesn't know. I haven't told him. I'm frightened, Dr. Lockhart. My last confinement was difficult, and that was 15 years ago. I'm not sure I can go through that again." Maeve reached over and took the woman's hand. "Let's take this one step at a time. First, we confirm whether you're actually expecting. Then we make a plan. I'll be with you through the whole process, I promise." The examination confirmed what Martha had suspected, and by the time the banker's wife left, Maeve had received a $2 payment for the consultation and a promise of more when the baby came. It was something, but not nearly enough. The next morning, Maeve opened her office to find 3 patients waiting. Old Mr. Carmichael needed his rheumatism liniment refilled. Young Tommy Bradford had a nasty cut on his hand that needed stitching. And Miss Alina Wright, the schoolteacher, complained of persistent headaches. By noon, Maeve had earned another $8, but she had also used up supplies that would need to be replaced. She was cleaning her instruments when she heard raised voices outside. Through the window, she could see a crowd gathering near the general store. Curious, she stepped out onto the boardwalk and made her way toward the commotion. "I'm telling you, that bull is worth at least $200. A familiar voice was saying. "I've got breeding certificates going back 3 generations." Maeve recognized the speaker as Zachary Walsh, a rancher who owned a spread about 10 miles south of town. She had met him exactly once, when he had brought in one of his ranch hands with a case of pneumonia 6 months ago. He was a tall man, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that tended to fall across his forehead and eyes the color of the Texas sky. She remembered those eyes because they had regarded her with neither the skepticism nor the inappropriate interest she usually encountered from men, but with simple respect for her professional abilities. Now those eyes were flashing with anger as he faced down Herbert Morrison, the cattle buyer who made regular circuits through the territory. "I don't care about certificates," Morrison was saying, his voice dripping with condescension. "The market's soft right now. I'm offering $150, and that's being generous. That bull's sired 30 calves in the last 2 years, and every one of them was prime stock," Zachary said, his voice tight with frustration. "He's worth more than $150, and you know it." Maeve watched as the argument continued, and she found herself studying Zachary Walsh more closely than she had during their previous brief encounter. He was dressed in worn but clean work clothes, and there was a dignity to him even in his anger. He was not begging or pleading, simply stating facts and refusing to be cheated. Eventually, Morrison shrugged and started to walk away. $150 is my final offer. Take it or leave it. I'll be in town until tomorrow morning." Zachary stood in the street, his jaw clenched, watching the buyer disappear into the saloon. Maeve saw the moment his shoulders sagged slightly, the defeat settling in despite his proud stance. She should have gone back to her office. She had her own problems to worry about. But something made her approach him instead. "Mr. Walsh," she said quietly. He turned, and recognition flickered across his face. "Dr. Lockhart, I didn't see you there. I couldn't help but overhear. I'm sorry Morrison is being difficult." Zachary managed a rueful smile. "That's one word for it. But it's not your concern, Doc. How have you been? Town treating you well?" The kindness in the question, the genuine interest, caught her off guard. Most people in Llano had long since stopped asking how she was doing, accepting her as part of the landscape but not particularly caring about her struggles. "Well enough," she said, which was not quite a lie but not quite the truth either. "Your hand who had pneumonia, is he recovered?" "Miguel." "Yes, madam, thanks to you. He's back to full strength, working harder than ever." They stood there for a moment, and Maeve was acutely aware of the way the sunlight brought out copper highlights in his dark hair, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. She gave herself a mental shake. She did not have time for such thoughts. "Well, I should get back to my office. I hope you get a fair price for your bull." "Appreciate that, Doc." She walked away, but she could feel his gaze on her back until she turned the corner. That evening, Maeve was tallying her day's earnings when she heard footsteps on the stairs leading up to her room. She opened the door to find Sheriff Bradley, his face grim. "Doc, I need you to come down to the jail. Got a prisoner who's in bad shape." She followed him through the darkening streets to the small jailhouse. Inside one of the two cells, a man lay curled on the cot, moaning softly. The smell hit her immediately, a sickly sweet odor that spoke of infected wounds and fever. "What happened to him?" she asked as Bradley unlocked the cell. "Got caught rustling cattle from the Morrison herd. Put up a fight when we tried to bring him in. He's got a knife wound to the side, maybe 2 days old now." Maeve knelt beside the cot and began her examination. The man was burning with fever, and when she lifted his shirt, she saw that the wound was badly infected, red streaks radiating outward from the gash. "This is serious. He needs to be in my office where I have proper supplies." "Can't do that, Doc. He's a criminal. Has to stay locked up." "Then bring my supplies here, because if this infection spreads to his blood, he'll be dead in 2 days. Bradley looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "Do what you can for him. The county will cover your fee." She worked late into the night, cleaning and draining the wound, applying carbolic acid despite the man's screams of pain. She left him with instructions for Bradley to give him water every hour and to send for her immediately if his condition worsened. When she finally made it back to her room, she was exhausted and her clothes were stained with blood and pus. She had used the last of her carbolic acid, which meant she would need to purchase more from the pharmacy in the morning. The county would pay her eventually, but eventually did not help with the $60 debt that was now due in 5 days. The next morning brought a surprise. When Maeve entered her office, she found a small pouch sitting on her desk. Inside were 60 silver dollars and a note written in a careful, masculine hand. "For your work with the sick, you shouldn't have to choose between helping people and keeping your practice open." There was no signature. Maeve stared at the money, her heart pounding. Who would have done this? And how did they know about her financial troubles? She had been careful not to let her desperation show, at least not to most people. Sheriff Bradley knew something of her situation, but he did not have this kind of money to spare. Martha Simmons might have mentioned something to her husband, but the banker was notoriously tight-fisted. She counted the money 3 times, unable to quite believe it was real. $60. Exactly what she needed, not a penny more or less. Someone had known precisely how much she owed. Her first instinct was to refuse it, to track down whoever had left it and return the money. She had not come to Texas to accept charity. But as she sat there, holding the small leather pouch, she realized that refusing might be the more selfish choice. If she lost her practice, the people of Llano would lose their only doctor. Old Mr. Carmichael would suffer with his rheumatism. Martha Simmons would have to face her pregnancy alone. Charlie Oakes might lose his leg to infection for lack of proper follow-up care. She made her decision. She would accept the money, pay her debt, and somehow find a way to repay whoever had been so generous. And she would start by working twice as hard to build up her practice so she would never be in this position again. The clerk at the medical supply company's telegraph office seemed surprised when she walked in that afternoon with the full payment. "Didn't expect to see you so soon, Dr. Lockhart. Things looking up." "You could say that," she replied, handing over the money and receiving a receipt in return. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for weeks finally lifted, and she could breathe freely again. Over the next few days, Maeve threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She checked on Charlie Oakes and found his leg healing well. She monitored Martha Simmons' pregnancy and prepared a detailed plan for her confinement. She treated a steady stream of minor injuries and illnesses, and slowly, her bank account began to recover. But she could not stop thinking about the anonymous gift. At night, lying in her narrow bed, she would run through the list of everyone who might have helped her, but none of the answers seemed to fit. The mystery nagged at her, a persistent itch she could not scratch. It was nearly 2 weeks later when she learned the truth, and it came from the most unexpected source. She was in the general store, purchasing coffee and flour, when she overheard Mrs. Patterson, the storekeeper's wife, talking to another woman. "Such a shame about Zachary Walsh having to sell his prize bull," Mrs. Patterson was saying. "That animal was the foundation of his whole breeding program." "Why did he sell it?" the other woman asked. "Nobody knows for sure, but Morrison got it for a song I heard." $160. Can you believe it? That bull was worth twice that at least. Maeve's hand tightened on the bag of flour she was holding. $160, and Morrison had been offering $150 when she overheard their argument. Which meant Zachary had gotten barely $10 more than the insultingly low initial offer. She thought about the timing. The argument had been in the morning. The money had appeared on her desk the next morning. $60 exactly. She finished her purchases in a daze and walked back to her office, her mind racing. It made no sense. She barely knew Zachary Walsh. They had spoken perhaps twice, both conversations brief and professional. Why would he give her such a substantial sum and sacrifice his prize bull to do it? She tried to push the thoughts away to focus on her work, but they kept returning. That evening, she made a decision. She needed to know the truth, and if Zachary Walsh had indeed been her anonymous benefactor, she needed to find a way to repay him. The next morning, she borrowed a horse from the livery stable and rode out to the Walsh ranch. The journey took just over an hour, and by the time she arrived, the sun was high overhead, beating down mercilessly on the dusty landscape. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, a large barn, and several corrals containing cattle and horses. She was tying her horse to the rail in front of the house when Zachary emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked surprised to see her. "Dr. Lockhart, is everything all right? Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that. I came to talk to you about something personal if you have a few minutes." His expression shifted to something more guarded, but he nodded. "Of course. Would you like to come inside? I can offer you some water at least." "It's too hot to stand out here in the sun." The inside of the house was simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and few decorations. Zachary poured them both glasses of water from a pitcher, and they sat at the kitchen table. Maeve had rehearsed what she wanted to say during the ride out, but now that she was here, the words felt inadequate. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Did you leave $60 on my desk 2 weeks ago? Zachary's face remained neutral, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. What makes you think it was me? Because you sold your prize bull the day before for a price you knew was far too low. Because someone knew exactly how much I owed. Because the timing fits perfectly. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. I hoped you wouldn't find out. It was meant to be anonymous. Why? The word burst out of her more forcefully than she intended. Why would you do that for me? You barely know me. Zachary chose his words carefully. 6 months ago, you saved Miguel's life. He has a wife and 3 children who depend on him. You didn't ask whether he could pay before you treated him, didn't even bring up money until he was on the mend. When I asked you what I owed, you charged me half of what I knew the treatment was worth because you said you knew times were hard for small ranchers. That was just being decent, maybe, but decency isn't as common as it should be, especially in a place like this. He took a sip of his water. I've been in town more often these last few months, and I hear things. I heard about how you're always available, day or night, how you treat everyone the same whether they're rich or poor, white or Mexican or Apache. I heard about how you sat with Emma Gonzalez when she was dying of consumption, holding her hand for 3 days straight because her family couldn't be there. I heard about how you gave Sarah Johnson herbs for her women's troubles without making her feel ashamed. Maeve felt heat rising to her cheeks. Those are just parts of my job. No, they're parts of who you are. Zachary's voice was soft but intense. And when I overheard the sheriff telling Morrison that you were about to lose your practice over some damn medical supply bill, I couldn't just stand by. This town needs you, Dr. Lockhart. People need you. But your bull, that was your livelihood. I'll manage. The cattle market's going to turn around eventually, and I can rebuild my breeding program. But there's only one doctor in Llano, and if you'd had to leave, people would have suffered. Might have died. Maeve felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had cried exactly once since arriving in Texas, on the night her first patient died despite everything she could do. She would not cry now. I'm going to pay you back, she said firmly. Every dollar. It might take me time, but I will do it. Zachary shook his head. It was a gift. Gifts don't need to be repaid. It was too much to be a gift. Please let me do this. Let me keep my pride. He studied her for a moment, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. All right, but no interest, and you take as long as you need. Deal? She extended her hand across the table. Deal. His hand was warm and calloused when it closed around hers, and she was suddenly very aware of how close they were sitting, how the afternoon light streaming through the window illuminated the strong lines of his face. She pulled her hand back perhaps a bit too quickly. I should get back to town, she said, standing abruptly. I have patients to see this afternoon. Zachary walked her out to her horse, and as she was preparing to mount, he spoke again. Dr. Lockhart, I know this might be forward of me, but would you consider having dinner with me sometime? Nothing fancy. Just a meal at the hotel restaurant, maybe, so we can talk without it being about money or medicine. She turned to look at him, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. He looked nervous, she realized. This confident rancher who had just given away $60 without a second thought looked genuinely nervous asking her to dinner. I'd like that, she heard herself say, but it has to be my treat, and I'm serious about that. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. Yes, madam, whatever you say. She rode back to town with her mind in turmoil. This was complicated. She had come to Texas to prove herself as a doctor, to build a career on her own terms, not to get entangled with a rancher, no matter how kind or handsome he might be. Romance was a distraction she could not afford. But that evening, as she prepared for bed, she found herself remembering the warmth of his hand, the intensity in his eyes when he talked about why he had helped her. Nobody had ever looked at her quite like that before, as if she was something precious worth protecting. She gave herself a firm mental lecture. One dinner. That was all she had agreed to. It did not have to mean anything more. The following Saturday, Maeve found herself standing in front of her small mirror, trying to decide what to wear. Her wardrobe was limited, consisting mainly of practical dresses suitable for making house calls and performing medical procedures. She finally settled on a dark blue dress with a white collar, the nicest thing she owned, and pinned her dark hair up in a style that was somewhat more elaborate than her usual practical bun. Zachary was waiting for her at the hotel restaurant, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed white shirt. He stood when she approached, and she saw approval in his eyes that made her feel warm despite herself. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The hotel restaurant was the finest dining establishment in Llano, which was not saying a tremendous amount, but the food was good and the atmosphere pleasant. They sat by a window overlooking the main street, and Maeve found herself relaxing as they talked. "So how does a woman end up becoming a doctor in Texas?" Zachary asked after they had ordered their meals. Maeve took a sip of her water, considering how much to tell him. "My father was a doctor in Ohio. I used to help him in his practice when I was young, and I fell in love with medicine. When I told him I wanted to attend medical school, he supported me, even though most people thought it was scandalous." "Was it difficult, getting your education?" "Harder than I can describe. The other students, all men of course, made it clear I wasn't welcome. Professors would skip over me when asking questions, or give me failing marks on work that was identical to assignments that earned my male classmates praise. But my father had taught me to be stubborn, and I refused to quit. I'm glad you didn't. So am I most days." "After I graduated, I tried to establish a practice in Cleveland, but no one would take a female doctor seriously. I could assist other physicians, hold their instruments and change bandages, but I couldn't treat patients on my own. So I decided to come west, where maybe people would be desperate enough for medical care that they would overlook my gender." "Has it worked out the way you hoped?" Maeve considered the question. "Yes and no. The people here have accepted me more than I expected, but there are still plenty who would prefer to ride 20 miles to see a male doctor in another town rather than trust me. And the financial side has been harder than I anticipated. A lot of my patients can't pay in cash, and while I appreciate the chickens and vegetables I receive in trade, they don't help when the medical supply company wants actual money. That's changing though, isn't it? I hear more people talking about you with respect. Give it time." Their food arrived and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Zachary said, "Can I tell you something? When you came out to treat Miguel, I was scared out of my mind. He was burning up with fever, could barely breathe, and I thought he was going to die. I'd sent someone to fetch the doctor, and when you showed up instead, my first thought was anger. I thought the sheriff had sent you as some kind of joke. I remember the look on your face. Most people aren't that good at hiding their thoughts. Yeah, I'm not great at deception. But then you just got to work. No hesitation, no defensiveness. You knew exactly what to do, and you did it with this calm efficiency that made me believe everything would be all right. And it was. Miguel recovered completely, and it was because of you. That's when I started paying attention. Paying attention to you, to what people said about you, to the work you were doing. I'd ride into town for supplies and find myself hoping I'd catch a glimpse of you. I'd make up excuses to linger, to maybe have a reason to talk to you." He looked almost embarrassed. "I'm not usually like this. I'm not the kind of man who moons over women." Maeve felt her breath catch. "Then why me?" "Because you're extraordinary. You're brilliant and compassionate and brave. You're doing something that most men wouldn't have the courage to attempt, and you're succeeding despite everything stacked against you." He met her eyes directly. "Because when I'm around you, everything seems a little brighter, a little more possible." She did not know what to say to that. No one had ever spoken to her with such open admiration, such genuine feeling. Most men either saw her as a curiosity or felt threatened by her education and independence. "Zachary, I don't know if I can be what you're hoping for. My work has to come first. It has to. I've sacrificed too much to get where I am to let anything derail me now. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm just asking for a chance to know you better, to see where this might lead. No promises, no expectations beyond that." She looked at him across the table. This man who had given up his prize bowl for her without asking for anything in return, who looked at her like she hung the moon, and she felt something in her chest loosen and expand. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." They finished their dinner talking about easier things, about his ranch and his plans for expansion, about the books they had read and the places they dreamed of seeing someday. When he walked her back to her office, the Texas night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "Thank you for tonight," he said when they reached her door. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed an evening so much." "Neither can I." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to do this again sometime?" His smile could have lit up the whole street. "I would like that more than just about anything." He did not try to kiss her, which she appreciated. Instead, he took her hand and raised it briefly to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that was somehow more intimate than a kiss might have been. She watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it, and wondered what exactly she was getting herself into. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Zachary would ride into town once or twice a week, ostensibly for supplies or business, but he would always find time to stop by her office. Sometimes they would have lunched together at the cafe. Sometimes they would just sit on the bench outside her office and talk while she waited for patients. Sometimes he would help her with tasks around the office, fixing a squeaky hinge or replacing a broken window latch. The people of Llano noticed, of course. A town of 500 people had few secrets. Mrs. Patterson made knowing comments when Maeve came into the general store. Sheriff Bradley grinned every time he saw them together. But mostly, people seemed pleased. Zachary was well liked and respected, and Maeve had earned her place in the community. Their romance felt natural, inevitable even. Maeve found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering something he had said or the way he laughed. She caught herself watching for him out the window, her heart lifting when she spotted his familiar figure riding down the street. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One afternoon in late July, a rider came thundering into town shouting for the doctor. Maeve ran out of her office to find a young man she did not recognize, his horse lathered with sweat. "There's been an accident at the Walsh ranch," he gasped. "Mr. Walsh was breaking a horse and got thrown. He's hurt bad." Maeve's blood turned to ice. "Get doctor." Mitchell's old medical wagon hitched up immediately, she ordered the sheriff, who had come running at the commotion. "We need to move fast." The ride to the Walsh ranch was the longest hour of her life. She kept imagining all the things that could be wrong, all the ways a fall from a horse could kill or cripple a man. Head injury, broken spine, internal bleeding. She forced herself to stay calm, to think like a doctor and not like a woman who had just realized she might lose the man she was falling in love with. When they arrived, she found Zachary lying on his back in the dirt of the corral, conscious but clearly in pain. Miguel was kneeling beside him, keeping him still. "Don't move," Maeve ordered, dropping to her knees beside them. "Tell me where it hurts." "Left side ribs," Zachary managed through gritted teeth, "and my left arm." She conducted a careful examination, grateful that he had not been knocked unconscious. His left arm was definitely broken, a clean break of the radius that would need to be set. His ribs were bruised or cracked, but she could feel no shifting that would indicate a dangerous break. Most importantly, his pupils were equal and reactive, and he could move all his extremities. "You're lucky," she told him, relief making her voice sharp. "The arm's broken and you have cracked ribs, but nothing life-threatening. Can you stand if we help you?" With Miguel on one side and a ranch hand on the other, they got Zachary into the house and onto his bed. Maeve worked methodically, setting and splinting the arm despite his obvious pain, then binding his ribs tightly. "You need to rest," she told him when she was finished. "The ribs will take 4 to 6 weeks to heal, and the arm will need to stay splinted for at least that long. No riding, no heavy lifting, nothing that might cause those ribs to shift. That's impossible. I have a ranch to run. Miguel and your other hands can run it. Your job is to heal." She softened her tone. "Please, Zachary. I've seen men who didn't take injuries like this seriously. The best case is they take twice as long to heal. The worst case is a broken rib punctures a lung and they die drowning in their own blood." He must have heard the fear beneath her professional demeanor because he reached out with his good hand and caught hers. "All right, I'll rest. But only if you promise to come check on me regularly. Can't have me dying out here for lack of medical supervision." "I'll come every other day until I'm satisfied you are healing properly. Guess I'll just have to heal slowly then." Despite everything, she found herself smiling. "Don't you dare. You scared me half to death today." His expression turned serious. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Over the next several weeks, Maeve made the ride out to the Walsh ranch every other day, sometimes staying for hours to change bandages and check on his progress. She brought books from her small collection to help ease his boredom, and they would sit in his room talking while she worked. It was during one of these visits that things changed between them. She was checking the splint on his arm, making sure it was still secure, when he said quietly, "Maeve, can I ask you something?" She had been Maeve to him for a few weeks now, though she was still Dr. Lockhart to almost everyone else in Llano. Hearing her name in his voice still sent a little thrill through her, of course. "When you thought I might be seriously hurt, what did you feel?" She looked up and found him watching her intently. "I was afraid. Terrified, actually. I kept thinking about all the things that could be wrong, all the ways I might not be able to help you. Because I'm your patient." "No." The word came out softer than she intended. "Not just because of that." Then why? She could have deflected, could have made a joke or changed the subject. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Because somewhere along the way, you became important to me. Because the thought of losing you made me realize that I care about you far more than is probably wise." Zachary reached out with his good hand and cupped her cheek. "That's good, because I'm pretty sure I'm falling in love with you," her breath caught. "That's not wise either. I'm difficult and stubborn and married to my work. I know, it's part of why I love you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you put everyone else's needs before your own. I know you hide your fears behind that professional mask, but you feel everything deeply. I know you take your coffee with cream and sugar, but you'll drink it black if that's all there is. I know you read medical journals at night when you can't sleep, and that you're terrified you are not good enough even though you are the best doctor this town has ever had. She felt tears welling up, and one escaped to track down her cheek. He wiped it away gently with his thumb. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I've never felt like this before, and I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything. Just let yourself feel it. Let yourself be happy." She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss that quickly deepened into something more. His good arm came around her, pulling her closer, and for a moment everything else fell away. There was just the two of them, the afternoon light streaming through the window and this perfect moment of connection. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless. "We shouldn't do that." "You need to rest." "My ribs are fine. My lips work perfectly well," she laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Still, no excitement, doctor's orders." "You're a cruel woman, Maeve Lockhart, so I've been told." As summer turned to autumn, Zachary healed and their relationship deepened. He was allowed to resume light activities in late August, and by September he was back to running his ranch, though Maeve still insisted he take things easy with the heavier work. They spent as much time together as their respective responsibilities allowed, stealing hours here and there. In October, Martha Simmons went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Maeve feared she would lose both mother and child. But finally, in the gray light of dawn, a baby girl was born, small but healthy, with powerful lungs that she demonstrated immediately. Maeve was exhausted but triumphant when she finally left the Simmons house. She had planned to go straight home and sleep, but instead she found herself directing her horse toward the Walsh ranch. She found Zachary in the barn, mending a piece of tack. When he saw her, covered in blood and swaying with exhaustion, he immediately set aside his work and came to her. "What happened? Are you all right?" Martha Simmons had her baby. "A girl. They are both going to be fine." The words came out slurred with fatigue. "That's wonderful. But you look dead on your feet. Come inside." She let him lead her into the house, let him guide her to the sofa. She meant to sit for just a moment, to catch her breath before riding back to town. Instead, she found her eyes closing of their own accord. When she woke, it was dark outside and she was covered with a quilt. Zachary was sitting in a chair across from her, reading by lamplight. When he saw her stirring, he set the book aside. "Welcome back. You've been asleep for about 6 hours." She sat up, momentarily disoriented. "I should get back to town." "Why, do you have patients who need you right now?" "Well, no, but I can't just stay here." "Why not?" His voice was gentle but serious. "Maeve, you are exhausted. You work yourself to the bone and you never take time for yourself. Stay tonight. Rest. Let me take care of you for once." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was fine and did not need looking after. But the truth was, she was tired. Bone tired. Soul tired. And the idea of staying here, of not having to ride back to her empty room above the office, was incredibly appealing. "Just tonight," she said. He smiled. "Just tonight." He made her dinner, simple but good, and they ate together at the kitchen table. Afterward, he showed her to the guest room, which was clean and comfortable with a real bed, much nicer than her narrow cot in town. "Thank you," she said. "For this, for everything." He kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." She slept more soundly than she had in months, and when she woke to morning sunlight streaming through the window, she felt restored in a way she had not felt in a long time. Zachary was making coffee when she emerged from the guest room. "Morning." "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in ages." She accepted the cup of coffee he handed her. "I should probably head back to town soon, though." "Probably." He paused, then said, "Or you could stay a while longer. I thought maybe we could ride out to the north pasture. There's a spot up there with a view of the whole valley. It's beautiful this time of year." She should have said no. She had responsibilities, patients who might need her. But the thought of spending a peaceful morning with him, away from the demands and pressures of her practice, was too tempting to resist. I'd like that. They rode out together, taking it slow and easy, and he was right about the view. From the high point of his north pasture, they could see for miles, the Texas landscape spreading out before them in shades of gold and brown beneath the endless blue sky. "This is where I come when I need to think," Zachary said. "When my father died and left me the ranch, I spent a lot of time up here, trying to figure out if I was strong enough to keep his legacy alive. When the drought hit 2 years ago and I thought I might lose everything, I'd come up here and remind myself why it was worth fighting for." "And what's your reason?" "This land has been in my family for 30 years. My father loved it and I love it too. It's not easy ranching in Texas. The weather's brutal, the work's backbreaking, and you're one drought or one harsh winter away from losing everything. But when I look out at this view, when I see my cattle healthy and fat, when I watch the sunset paint the sky, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Maeve understood that feeling. It was how she felt about medicine, about the work she had chosen. "I know exactly what you mean." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Zachary said, "I've been thinking about something, about us." "What about us?" "I want more. I want you in my life permanently, not just when we can steal a few hours here and there. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a future together." Her heart was hammering in her chest. "Zachary, I can't give up my practice. I can't be just a rancher's wife, cooking and cleaning and having babies." "I'm not asking you to." "I know who you are, Maeve. I know what medicine means to you, and I would never ask you to give that up. We'd figure it out. You could keep your office in town, keep treating patients. I'd support you in every way I could." "How would that even work? Your ranch is 10 miles from town." "Then I'll ride in with you when you need to be there. Or you can stay in town during the week and come home on weekends. Or we could get a small place in Llano that you could use when you're working long hours. There are solutions if we want to find them." She looked at him, this man who had turned her carefully ordered world upside down. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes. I know it's complicated, I know there are a lot of details to work out, but I love you, Maeve. I want to spend my life with you however we need to arrange it." She thought about her life before him, the loneliness she had been too proud to acknowledge, the way she had thrown herself into work partly because there was nothing else. She thought about how he had given her $60 when she needed it most, how he had looked at her with respect and admiration from the very beginning, how he made her laugh and challenged her to be more than just a doctor. She thought about how empty her life would be without him in it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The joy on his face was incandescent. He pulled her close and kissed her, deep and passionate, and she kissed him back with all the feelings she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning. "We should probably talk about the practical details." "Probably. But not right now. Right now, I just want to enjoy this moment." They rode back to the ranch house hand in hand and spent the afternoon making plans. They would marry in December, after the fall roundup was complete and before the worst of winter set in. Maeve would keep her office and her practice in town, but the ranch would be her home. Zachary would help her however he could, and they would make it work through compromise and determination. When Maeve finally returned to town that evening, she felt like she was floating. She stopped by the sheriff's office to let him know she was back and available for emergencies, and his eyes widened when he saw the expression on her face. "You look mighty happy, Doc. Something good happened." "Zachary Walsh asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Bradley's face split into a huge grin. "Well, that's wonderful news. When's the wedding?" "December sometime. We are still working out the details. News of the engagement spread through Llano like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know, and Maeve received a steady stream of well-wishers throughout the day. Some were genuinely happy for her. Others seemed skeptical that she could balance marriage with her career. But mostly, people were pleased. The months between October and December passed in a blur of activity. Maeve continued her practice, treating the usual mix of injuries and illnesses while also preparing for the wedding. They decided on December 15th, a date that gave them time to prepare but did not push too deep into winter. The ceremony itself was simple, held in the small church in Llano with most of the town in attendance. Maeve wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Martha Simmons had helped her sew, and Zachary wore his best suit. Sheriff Bradley stood up as best man, and Martha served as matron of honor, baby Susan in her arms, when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Zachary kissed her in front of everyone. Maeve felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, with this man, building this life. The reception was held at the hotel, with dancing and food and a general air of celebration. Maeve danced with her new husband, with the sheriff, with Mr. Simmons the banker, and by the end of the evening her feet were sore but her heart was full. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in Zachary's room, which was now their room, and Maeve discovered that marriage had some very pleasant aspects she had not previously considered. When she woke the next morning wrapped in her husband's arms, she felt a sense of peace and contentment she had never experienced before. The next few months brought adjustments. Maeve kept her office in town and spent most weekdays there, treating patients and handling the day-to-day aspects of her practice. Zachary would often ride in during the day to have lunch with her, and she would return to the ranch most evenings. When she had night calls or difficult cases that kept her in town late, she would stay in her old room above the office, but increasingly that felt strange and lonely. The ranch had become home. In March, Maeve realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain before telling Zachary, but when she did, his joy was uncontainable. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "An actual baby." "That is generally what happens when people get married," she said dryly, but she was smiling. "Are you happy about it?" "I am. Terrified, but happy. I've helped deliver dozens of babies, but having one of my own is going to be entirely different. You are going to be an amazing mother." She hoped he was right. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Maeve found herself viewing it with a physician's clinical eye even as she experienced it. She continued working through her first and second trimesters, only cutting back her hours as she moved into the third. In November, nearly a year after their wedding, she went into labor. She had planned to deliver at the ranch with one of the other women from town assisting, but labor progressed faster than expected. Zachary sent Miguel racing to town to fetch Mrs. Henderson, who had experience as a midwife, but the baby was not waiting. "I can do this," Maeve told Zachary through gritted teeth. "I've done this dozens of times for other women. Just follow my instructions exactly." Zachary, to his credit, stayed calm despite his obvious terror. He helped her into position, gathered the supplies she directed him to prepare, and when the baby finally came in a rush of fluid and blood, he was there to catch his son. "It's a boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Maeve, we have a son." She reached for the baby, checking him over with professional efficiency even as tears streamed down her face. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lusty cries that indicated healthy lungs. "Perfect." "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him James, after Maeve's father, and Zachary proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He would walk the floor with James for hours when the baby was fussy, would change diapers without complaint, would sit and watch his son sleep with an expression of such pure love that it made Maeve's heart ache. Having James did force more changes to their routine. Maeve took 2 months off from her practice entirely, and even after she returned, she worked fewer hours and was more selective about taking night calls. Sheriff Bradley helped her find a young man named Timothy Grant who wanted to study medicine, and she began training him as an assistant. He could handle minor cases and serve as an extra pair of hands for more serious ones. Life settled into a new pattern. The ranch prospered, Maeve's practice grew, and James thrived. The debt Maeve had insisted on repaying to Zachary had been satisfied within the first year of their marriage, though Zachary had protested that it was not necessary. But it had been necessary to her, to feel that she had honored that obligation. When James was 18 months old, Maeve discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was more difficult, with persistent nausea that lasted well into the second trimester and exhaustion that made working hard. But in July of 1887, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Sarah. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father around the ranch and peppered his mother with questions about everything. Sarah was quieter but equally bright, and she showed an early interest in plants and growing things. Zachary expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjoining land when it became available and building up his breeding program. Maeve continued her medical practice, though she had to carefully balance her time between her work and her family. Timothy proved to be an excellent assistant, and eventually he went off to medical school himself, though he promised to return to Llano when he completed his training. Maeve began mentoring other young people interested in medicine, passing on her knowledge and skills. One evening in the spring of 1890, Maeve and Zachary were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching James and Sarah play in the yard. James was 6 now, teaching his 4-year-old sister how to rope a fence post, both of them giggling at their failures. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Zachary asked. "If Morrison had paid me a fair price for that bull, if I had not left the money for you," Maeve leaned against his shoulder. "Sometimes. But I am glad things happened the way they did. I would not change any of it. Not even the parts that were hard, especially not those parts. They taught me that I did not have to do everything alone, that accepting help was not weakness. That love did not mean giving up who I was, but becoming more fully myself." He wrapped his arm around her. "You know, I never told you the whole truth about why I helped you." "What do you mean?" I said it was because the town needed a doctor, and that was true. But the real reason was that I was already half in love with you. I had been watching you for months, building up the courage to speak to you, and when I heard you were in trouble, I could not stand by. I told myself it was about doing the right thing, but really it was about you. She turned to look at him. "You never said that before." "I know. I did not want you to feel obligated or to think I was trying to buy your affection. But we have been married 6 years now, and I think it is time you knew the whole truth." Maeve kissed him softly. "I'm glad you told me. And I am glad you left that money on my desk, even if it did make me crazy trying to figure out who had done it. No regrets. Not a single one." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle lowed softly and a nightingale began its evening song. Life was not perfect. There were still challenges, still struggles. The ranch had bad years as well as good ones. Maeve's practice had difficult cases and heartbreaking losses. Parenting was exhausting and sometimes frustrating. But through it all, they had each other. The years continued to roll by. James grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father did and eventually took over much of the day-to-day operations. Sarah discovered a gift for healing and began studying medicine with her mother, eventually going off to medical school, just as Maeve had done decades before. Timothy Grant returned from his education and opened his own practice in a nearby town. But he and Maeve remained close colleagues, consulting on difficult cases and supporting each other's work. The medical community's acceptance of female physicians was growing slowly, and Maeve took pride in knowing that she had helped pave the way for the next generation. In 1895, Maeve delivered another surprise baby at age 41, a son they named Thomas. His arrival brought new energy to the household and reminded them both how precious and fleeting childhood was. They poured their love into all three of their children, raising them to be kind, strong, and independent. As the new century approached, Maeve looked back on her life with deep satisfaction. She had achieved her dream of becoming a doctor and building a successful practice. She had found love with a man who respected and supported her completely. She had raised 3 wonderful children and helped train the next generation of physicians. The girl who had arrived in Llano desperate and nearly broken had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined. One warm evening in June of 1900, the entire Walsh family gathered on the ranch for a celebration. James had just gotten engaged to Elena Rodriguez, Miguel's daughter, and they were toasting the happy couple. Sarah was home from medical school for the summer, full of stories about her studies. Thomas, now 5 years old, was showing off his rope skills to anyone who would watch. Zachary pulled Maeve aside during the celebration, leading her away from the noise and laughter to the quiet of the barn. "Remember when we first stood here?" he asked. "When you came to yell at me about the money, I was not yelling. I was firmly expressing my concerns," he laughed. "Whatever you want to call it, but do you remember? Of course. I was so angry and confused and grateful all at the same time. I could not figure out why you had done it. And now I understand. You saw someone struggling and you helped them without expecting anything in return. It is who you are, who you have always been. I got something in return, though. I got you. I got this life, this family, everything I never knew I wanted. And it all started with $60 and a bull I was too stubborn to let go for cheap." Maeve looked up at her husband, his face lined with age now but still handsome, his eyes still the color of the Texas sky. "Best $60 ever spent, without a doubt. Though I should probably confess something. That bull Morrison bought, he did not sire anywhere near 30 calves like I told him. It was more like 15. She laughed, delighted. "You lied about your prize bull." I might have exaggerated slightly. "But Morrison was not going to check, and I needed the extra money to help you. So yes, I lied. Do you think less of me? Not even slightly, though I am impressed by your devotion to the cause." They could hear the celebration continuing in the house, the sound of their family laughing and talking together. This was their legacy, Maeve thought. Not just the ranch or the medical practice, but this family they had built, this love that had started with an act of quiet generosity and had grown into something that would outlast them both. "We should get back to the party," she said. "They will wonder where we went. In a minute. I want to stay here with you for just a little longer, just the two of us like it was in the beginning." She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his embrace. "I love you, Zachary Walsh. I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can express. I know. And I love you too, Maeve. Every single day I love you more." They stood together in the quiet barn, surrounded by the life they had built, and Maeve felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She thought about that desperate young doctor who had stared at an impossible debt and wondered if her dreams were over. She thought about the cowboy who had sold his prize bull to help a woman he barely knew. She thought about all the moments, big and small, that had brought them to this place, this time, this perfect evening. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility. James would marry Llano and hopefully give them grandchildren. Sarah would finish medical school and perhaps join Maeve's practice or start her own. Thomas would grow and find his own path. The ranch would continue to prosper. The work would go on. But right now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The doctor had her practice and her pride. The cowboy had rebuilt his herd and his breeding program. And together, they had something more valuable than any amount of money or any prize bull. They had each other. And they had a love that had started with sacrifice and grown into something unbreakable. They had taken a chance on each other, and in doing so, had found their way home. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the Texas stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above them, Maeve thought about the long journey that had brought her here. The struggles and triumphs, the fear and the courage, the loneliness and the love. Every step had been necessary, every challenge had shaped her, and every moment had led to this. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love. Maeve danced with her husband, with her children, with Miguel and Martha, and all the people who had become her family over the years. She felt young and light and infinitely blessed. When the last guest had left and the children were finally asleep, Maeve and Zachary climbed into their bed exhausted but content. She curled against him, fitting perfectly into the space beneath his arm as she had done thousands of times before. "It was a good party," she murmured sleepily. "It was a good life," he replied. And as she drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, Maeve silently agreed. It was a good life indeed. Perhaps the best life possible, built on a foundation of sacrifice and trust and love that would endure for all their days. The years that followed brought their share of joys and sorrows, as all lives must. There were grandchildren, 8 in total over the course of the next 2 decades, and each one was a treasure. There were setbacks and losses too. Miguel passed away in 1905, and Maeve mourned the loss of a good friend. Martha followed him 3 years later, and the town gathered to remember a woman who had been a pillar of the community. Through it all, Maeve and Zachary faced each challenge together, drawing strength from their partnership. When the drought of 1910 threatened to devastate the ranch, they worked side by side to keep the cattle alive. When the influenza epidemic of 1918 swept through Llano, Maeve and Sarah worked around the clock treating the sick, while Zachary organized relief efforts and made sure the medical practice stayed supplied. By the time Zachary reached his 60th birthday in 1920, he was a respected elder of the community, and Maeve at 56 was training her 3rd generation of medical students. They had achieved more than they had ever dreamed possible, but the greatest achievement was simply that they had done it together. One evening as they sat on their porch, grandchildren playing in the yard just as their own children once had, Zachary said, "Do you remember what you told me once? About how accepting help was not weakness." "I remember." "Why do you ask?" "Because I have been thinking about retiring, handing the ranch over to James fully and spending more time with you, but part of me feels like it would be giving up, admitting I am too old to keep working." Maeve took his hand. "It is not giving up. It is recognizing that there are seasons to life, and maybe our season of hard labor is coming to an end. Maybe it is time for the season of rest and enjoyment. Are you thinking about retiring too?" "I am cutting back." Sarah is more than capable of handling most cases now, and Timothy's son just finished medical school and is joining the practice. I will always be a doctor, but maybe I don't need to be a doctor every single day anymore. They made the decision together, as they made all their important decisions. Zachary officially handed over the ranch operations to James, though he still helped out and offered advice when asked. Maeve reduced her hours to just 2 days a week, focusing on teaching and mentoring rather than daily practice. The change was strange at first, having so much time together after decades of carefully balancing work and family. But they quickly discovered they enjoyed it. They took rides out to the north pasture just to watch the sunset. They read books together in the evening. They visited their children and grandchildren and took joy in watching the next generation grow. On a cool December evening in 1925, almost 35 years after their wedding, Maeve and Zachary dressed in their finest clothes and returned to the small church in Llano. The congregation had organized a celebration of their anniversary, and the whole town turned out. Sarah stood up to speak, her voice strong and confident. "My mother once told me that the measure of a good life was not in wealth or fame, but in the lives you touched and the love you shared. By that measure, my parents have lived the richest life imaginable. My mother has saved countless lives and trained dozens of doctors. My father has built a ranch that provides for families and raised cattle that have improved herds throughout Texas. But more than that, they have shown us all what true partnership looks like. They have faced every challenge together, celebrated every triumph together, and built a love that has been a foundation not just for our family but for this entire community." Maeve felt tears streaming down her face as her daughter spoke, and when she looked at Zachary, his eyes were equally wet. Around them, their children and grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, the people they had served and loved for decades, all smiled and applauded. After the celebration, as they rode home under a sky full of stars, Zachary said, "I would do it all again. Every single moment. Even selling your prize bull, especially that. That bull bought me everything that mattered. He bought me you." Maeve leaned against her husband, feeling the steady rhythm of the wagon beneath them, the cool night air on her face, and the warmth of the man beside her. "I used to think I had to do everything myself," she said softly. "I thought accepting help meant I was weak, that letting myself love someone meant giving up who I was. But you taught me that the strongest thing we can do is let ourselves be vulnerable, let ourselves be loved." "We taught each other," Zachary corrected gently. "You taught me that strength comes in many forms, that courage is not just about physical bravery, but about standing up for what you believe in even when the world tells you that you cannot do it." They reached the ranch and walked hand in hand into the house that had been their home for so many years. Every room held memories. Every corner had witnessed some moment of joy or sorrow or simple daily life. This was where they had raised their children, where they had laughed and cried and loved. This was where their story had unfolded. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine with the ease of long practice, Maeve found herself thinking about that young woman who had arrived in Llano in 1881, desperate and alone. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, would she believe it? Would she believe that generosity from a stranger would lead to the greatest love of her life? That the greatest struggles would lead to the greatest triumphs? Probably not. But that woman had possessed the courage to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. She had the strength to accept help when it was offered. She had the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared, even if it came in an unexpected form. And that, Maeve thought as she climbed into bed beside her husband, was perhaps the greatest lesson of all. Life rarely turned out the way you planned, But if you remained open to possibility, if you had courage enough to be vulnerable and accept help when you needed it, if you could recognize and nurture love when it appeared, then you might just find yourself building something more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, pulling her close. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky we are. Not luck. We worked for this. We chose each other every single day. Then I am glad we made those choices. So am I, my love, so am I." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had started as near strangers and had become so intertwined that neither could imagine life without the other. Outside, the Texas wind whispered through the grasslands and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Inside, two hearts beat in quiet synchrony, a testament to a love that had started with an act of sacrifice and had grown into something that would echo through generations. The doctor who had needed $60 she did not have had found something worth far more than money. The cowboy who had sold his prize bull and paid it quietly had gained infinitely more than he had given up. Together, they had built a legacy of love, service, and partnership that would inspire their children, their grandchildren, and all those who knew their story. And in the end, that was the truest measure of a life well lived. Not in the money earned or the possessions acquired, but in the love shared and the lives touched. In the quiet moments of connection and the grand gestures of sacrifice. In the daily choice to show up for each other, to support and encourage and love without reservation. As the years continued their inexorable march forward, as children grew and grandchildren had children of their own, the story of how Maeve and Zachary met became part of family legend. It was told at gatherings and celebrations, passed down as an example of what love could be when it was rooted in generosity and respect. The medical practice that Maeve founded continued for generations, with Sarah and later Sarah's daughter carrying on the tradition of compassionate care. The Walsh Ranch prospered under James's management and eventually passed to his children. But more than these tangible legacies, Maeve and Zachary left behind something intangible but infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that love, when nurtured and protected, when built on a foundation of mutual respect and selfless giving, could create something that would outlast any individual life. They grew old together, their steps slower but their hearts no less full. They watched the 20th century unfold with all its changes and challenges, always facing it together. And when the time came, as it must for all of us, they faced even that final journey with courage and grace, secure in the knowledge that they had lived and loved to the fullest. Their story did not end with dramatic gestures or grand pronouncements. It ended as it had been lived, with quiet dignity, deep love, and the satisfaction of knowing that they had built something beautiful together. The doctor and the cowboy, brought together by $60 and a prize bull, had created a love that would echo through time. And that, truly, was the best kind of ending. Not an ending at all, really, but a continuation. Their love lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the patients healed and the lives saved, in the ranch that continued to thrive, and the community they had helped build. They had given each other the greatest gift possible, a life of meaning, purpose, and love. Years after they were both gone, when their great-grandchildren gathered to hear the story of how it all began, they would marvel at the simple nobility of it. A man who saw someone in need and helped without expectation of reward. A woman who had the courage to accept that help and the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared. Two lives that had come together at exactly the right moment and had created something that would endure far beyond their years. The story of the doctor who wanted $60 she didn't have and the cowboy who sold his prize bull and paid it quietly became more than just family history. It became a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of entire lives. That love can bloom in the most unexpected places. That sacrifice made from the heart is never truly sacrifice, but investment in something far more valuable than money or possessions. And so their legacy continued, not in monuments or museums, but in the hearts of those who knew their story and carried forward their example. In acts of quiet generosity and unexpected kindness, in partnerships built on respect and maintained through dedication. In the simple truth that we are all connected, and that helping another person is never a loss, but always a gain. The Texas sun continued to rise and set over the land they had loved. The ranch continued its cycles of birth and growth and harvest. The medical practice continued to serve those in need. And somewhere in the fabric of it all, the spirit of what Maeve and Zachary had built together lived on. It was, in the end, a perfect love story. Not perfect because it was without struggle or challenge, but perfect because two people had chosen each other, and had kept choosing each other through all the days of their lives. Perfect because it demonstrated that love is not just a feeling but an action, not just a moment but a lifetime of moments strung together with care and intention. The doctor wanted $60 she did not have. The cowboy sold his prize bull and paid it quietly. And in that simple exchange began something that would prove more valuable than any amount of money, more precious than any prize animal. It began a love that would last a lifetime and echo through generations. It began a story that would inspire and encourage long after its main characters had taken their final bow. And that is how all the best love stories end, really. Not with an ending at all, but with the promise of continuation. With the knowledge that true love never dies, but simply transforms, living on in the lives it has touched and the hearts it has changed. Maeve and Zachary's story was not unique in its elements, but it was extraordinary in its execution. They took the raw materials of their lives, the challenges and opportunities that came their way, and they built something beautiful. They proved that it is possible to have both love and purpose, both partnership and independence. They showed that supporting someone does not mean diminishing yourself, and that accepting help does not mean surrendering your strength. They demonstrated that the best relationships are those where both people become more fully themselves, where love amplifies rather than limits, where partnership enhances rather than restricts. Their children carried these lessons forward, building their own loves and lives on the foundation their parents had established. Their grandchildren absorbed the story and applied its wisdom to their own relationships. And so it went, generation after generation, a ripple effect of love and generosity spreading outward from that one quiet act of sacrifice. The world changed around them and after them. Llano grew from a small frontier town to a thriving community. Texas evolved and modernized. The Wild West became the Old West, and then simply history. But the fundamental truths that Maeve and Zachary's story illustrated remained constant. Love requires sacrifice. Generosity creates connection. Respect and partnership form the foundation of lasting relationships. These truths did not change with time or circumstance, and so their story endures, a testament to the power of love born from sacrifice and nurtured through dedication. A reminder that the most valuable things in life cannot be purchased with money, but must be earned through courage, generosity, and the willingness to be vulnerable. A proof that sometimes the best things happen when we are brave enough to help others without expecting anything in return, and wise enough to accept help when we need it. The doctor and the cowboy. $60 and a prize bull. a debt paid quietly and a love discovered unexpectedly. It was a story as old as time and as fresh as tomorrow. It was their story, unique and irreplaceable, but it was also a universal story, one that speaks to the deepest human needs and the highest human possibilities. And they lived it beautifully, fully, without regret or reservation. They built a life that mattered, a love that endured, and a legacy that would inspire long after their names had faded from living memory. They took their chances and made their choices, and in doing so, they created something that would last forever. That is the power of true love, of genuine partnership, of sacrifice made freely and generously. It does not just change the lives of those directly involved. It radiates outward, touching everyone it encounters, creating ripples that extend far beyond what we can see or measure. Maeve and Zachary understood this, perhaps without fully articulating it. They knew that their love was not just for themselves, but was part of something larger, something that connected them to their community and their family, and the ongoing story of humanity itself. They lived their love story with grace and intention, with passion and dedication, with humor and tenderness. They faced their challenges together and celebrated their triumphs together. They grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. And when their time came to leave this world, they did so knowing that they had truly lived, that they had loved well and been loved in return, that they had made a difference in the world around them. They left behind not just children and grandchildren, but a blueprint for how to build a life of meaning and purpose. They showed that it is possible to have it all, not by having everything at once, but by prioritizing what truly matters and building a partnership strong enough to weather any storm. Their story, the story of the doctor who wanted $60 she didn't have and the cowboy who sold his prize bull and paid it quietly, became more than just a story. It became a part of who they were, individually and together. It became the foundation upon which they built everything else. And it remained long after they were gone, a source of inspiration and hope for all who heard it, because in the end, that is what the best love stories do. They inspire us to be better, to love more freely, to give more generously, to live more fully. They remind us that we are all connected, that our actions have consequences beyond what we can see, that kindness and generosity create ripples that extend far beyond the original gesture. Maeve wanted $60. Zachary gave it without hesitation, sacrificing something valuable to help someone in need. And from that simple act grew a love that would sustain them through decades, that would create a family, that would touch countless lives, that would endure long after they were both gone. It was, simply put, a love story for the ages, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real and true and built on a foundation of sacrifice and generosity. Because two people chose each other and kept choosing each other, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship, through all the days of their lives. And that is how their story ends, with satisfaction and fulfillment, with peace and contentment, with the knowledge that they had lived and loved well. The doctor and the cowboy, brought together by circumstances but bound together by choice. Their love story, born in the wild west of Texas in 1884, would live on forever in the hearts of those who knew them and in the legacy they left behind. It was a good ending. No, it was better than good. It was perfect. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was complete. All the threads were tied up, all the questions answered, all the promises fulfilled. They had started with nothing but hope and courage, and they had built a life beyond imagination. They had faced every challenge and celebrated every triumph together. They had loved each other faithfully and completely until the very end. And that, truly, is all anyone can ask for. A life well lived, a love well loved, and a legacy that endures. The doctor and the cowboy had all three, and in having them, they had everything that mattered. Their story was complete. Their love was eternal, and their legacy would continue forever.